This could be the most chaotic concert of all time. So chaotic, the whole band was arrested for inciting a riot. This is the story of when the Stranglers got arrested in Nice. One of my favourite bands ever. You probably know songs like No More Heroes. Or their monumental hit, Golden Brown.
Golden brown, texture like sun, lays me down, with my mind she runs throughout the night. No need to fight, never a frown, with golden brown.
Formed in 1974, the Stranglers jumped from genre to genre, although they were closely associated with the emerging UK punk scene of the 70s. The British press were keen on grouping them in with other acts as punk anarchists. General stories of the antisocial punk movement were spreading like wildfire across the UK, and there was definitely some distrust between the general public and punk fans. Other bands from the era like Sex Pistols and The Clash were facing bans from multiple venues just for being punk bands. Although, as drummer Jet Black says in his book, 7 Days in Nice, the Stranglers weren't anarchists. They were keen on making a career out of music. However, that's not to say the band didn't get up to some mischief in their time. Mischief that included inviting live strippers on stage, gaffer taping a journalist to the Eiffel Tower, being escorted out of a Swedish hotel by armed guards after causing a disturbance, and also, of course, collectively deciding to try heroin for a year as an artistic decision to see what would happen. And so, maybe understandably, the British press painted them as another naughty punk band, and that image stretched outside of the UK. On the 20th of June 1980, the Stranglers arrived in Nice, France, ready to play a gig. And as soon as they arrived, it was clear that certain people didn't want them to play. The day before the gig, a local newspaper had run a story about the anarchy and destruction the Stranglers had left on their tour, but it was largely exaggerated, likely rehashing the stuff that the British press had published in the past. And it all started with the equipment. A crew member informed the band that the venue, Nice University, had decided the band couldn't bring their truck into the grounds, and this meant the crew had to carry the equipment a long way themselves into the venue. Then they were informed that the venue probably didn't have enough power to run the show, and the organisers weren't doing anything to help. Now this was all worrying news for the band, because this was a chance to impress a European audience. I had a real feeling of foreboding at this point. Whatever was about to happen, we were on the cusp of a historical moment in our career. This now added immeasurable pressure to all the day's events. By the time the sold-out gig rolled around, as expected, the power kept cutting in and out. Now, before I continue, quick shout out for my Patreon page. If you like what I do and want to be more involved in the channel and support my journey, go to patreon.com/musicmongoose. Thanks. Now, as the night progressed, the crowd became more and more frustrated with the whole situation. The sound was so poor that it was ruining the gig. The band were even more frustrated, and then made a decision that would make the rest of their week hell. They decided to stop the gig midway through. Jet Black calmly explained to the crowd why it was happening, due to the poor planning by the university, and bass guitarist Jean-Jacques Burnel translated it into French so that there'd be no confusion. However, carnage followed. The crowd responded by destroying anything they could get their hands on, causing £10,000 worth of damage. But cut them some slack. They were French. I mean, it's in their culture to express their grievances, and rightly so. We were astonished as the crowd were seen in the now dimming light to be charging at plate glass windows with steel barricades in hand. Others were trying to set fire to palm trees. When the band could finally return to their hotel, they had a chance to meet some of the fans who had been there at the gig that night, and one of them revealed that newspaper article that I mentioned earlier in the videos about how the Stranglers cause riots wherever they go, which could explain why the crowd had acted the way they did. It was almost like the story was teeing them up to do just that. However, this whole ordeal of course wasn't over yet, because while the band felt they had done as much as they could do to calm things down, the French authorities disagreed. At 6 a.m. the next morning, the receptionist rang up to Jet Black's room and told him that there were police there to record a statement about the night before. The policeman told them that he was going to take their statements to a judge, and by 8 a.m. they would know if they were going to be charged with inciting a riot. Outraged at this idea of being charged for something they had no control over, the band refused to make statements, and they were all arrested. After being forced to make statements at the police station, they were marched one by one to their separate cells. Black said it was more of a sewer, if that helps you imagine things. And a few hours in a smelly cell later, the band were once again hauled out, and they were informed they were being taken to court. So they were taken across the street into a van, but not before this famous photo was taken. More on that later. After getting to the court and waiting around for a few hours, they were told that the judge actually couldn't see them that day, and so they were hauled back to prison. And it's worth mentioning at this point that Jet Black actually makes some pretty serious claims in his book about the human rights violations they were faced with in prison. They weren't given enough food, the cells were dirty, and they weren't given anywhere to wash themselves, according to him. And on top of that, he's convinced that the police did everything in their power to make sure the band weren't able to sleep, like constantly causing noise throughout the night, opening and closing the cell doors for no reason. A sleepless night later, they were taken back to court again, only to be told their statements needed to be added to, and so were taken back to the police station. And this back and forth continues for the better part of a week, with them being moved from place to place trying to organise legal help along the way. And by all accounts, the whole experience seemed to be pretty traumatic, especially considering there really wasn't much they could have done to control that crowd on the night. And after all, the band had tried to fix the sound issues, but they were shut down by the promoters at every corner. Eventually, they were allowed to leave Nice on the condition they would return for a trial in December of that year. So they returned to take part in the trial and try to prove their innocence. The final decision was made in January 1981. The band were to receive a suspended jail sentence and had to pay a fine to cover damages for the university. Now, despite this, Jet Black looked back at this whole ordeal as something that actually boosted their popularity in France. We were facing 10 years. In the end, a large fine was split between us and the university, but we laughed all the way to the bank. Before that, we were unknown in France. From then on, we played to packed houses. But despite this unexpected bonus, Jet Black, who died in 2022, never got over this ordeal. He made it his mission to uncover the corruption that took place that week in Nice. Now, his theory was that the Stranglers were just scapegoats for infighting between the university authorities and the students. Student protests across the country had made national news a lot that year. Political tensions surrounding plans to make changes to unions, payment, and more things that would directly impact the student population meant that there had been months of violence and uprising. After all, if there's one thing the French are very good at, it is of course protesting. So Black argues that when it came to that fateful night, it was inevitable that the students were going to use it as another chance to show how unhappy they were. Blaming the band for inciting a riot was just an easy way to shift the blame from the politics. Regardless, the band managed to get some good content out of it, because remember that photograph I mentioned earlier? Well, they used it as the cover for their 1986 single, Nice in Nice. While the lyrics of the song don't really have much to do with their 1980 ordeal, the name of the single, and of course the cover, are a nice little nod to everything that happened. Now, if you want to learn the full story behind the Stranglers song Gold and Brown, you can click over there and do that next.